Welcome to the City Current Show, powered by Hagen-Botham Insurance and Financial Services.
This show focuses on sharing good news and powering the good in our community. Now here's your host, Andrew Bartolotta.
Welcome to the cityCURRENT Show, where we bring you uplifting stories of individuals and organizations making an impact and powering the good in our community and around the globe. I'm your host, Andrew Bartolotta, and today we're honored to have Dr. Tracy Brower, who is a PhD sociologist and the VP of Workplace Insights at Steelcase. She's the author of two influential books, The Secrets to Happiness at Work and Bring Work to Life by Bringing Life to Work. As a senior contributor to Forbes and Fast Company, her insights on work-life fulfillment and organizational culture have resonated globally. And with over 25 years of experience, Dr. Brower has dedicated her career to helping individuals and organizations create more meaningful and joyful work experiences. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Of course. Okay, so let's kick it off on the personal and professional journey that got you here. What inspired your focus on work-life fulfillment and happiness in the workplace?
Uh, as with most things, there was a personal as well as a professional component. I was going back to school for my PhD, and I was threading the needle and connecting all the dots myself with young children and husband and work and family and all the things. And so that got me really curious about how we think about work life and different paradigms beyond balance. And so I really looked at how do people create fulfillment. And then, kind of on the professional side, there's this whole negative narrative of work today. Work is a grind, and the less work, the better, and work is just a terrible thing. And I just really believe that work is a part of a full life. And so I wanted to really research and dig deeply into what are the conditions for happiness and what are some of the ways that we can create fulfillment, even when work is hard, even when it's not ideal.
I love that. And I think that it's so great to look at the positive side because we can learn so much about the great things that are going on and this work-life harmony. Because when we look at balance, to me, it seems very unbalanced, to be honest. Uh,
Yes.
and so having a background in sociology, I think, really encourages you to use that approach to study workplace dynamics in a very clinical way, but in a way that you can look at it from a different perspective. And so you end up writing books. So in the Secrets to Happiness at Work, you discuss creating conditions for happiness. So what are some of the key takeaways for individuals seeking fulfillment in their careers?
Yeah, key takeaways. I mean, there's so many different ways that we can think about creating happiness. And interestingly, if we seek happiness for its own sake, we're less likely to accomplish it for two reasons. One, we tend to be seeking something, which reminds us of what we don't already have. Better to kind of be intentional about gratitude and what we do already have. But secondly, if we're really pursuing happiness for its own sake, it's usually about us. And that's negatively correlated with happiness. More positively correlated with happiness is thinking about how we're making a contribution and how we're contributing to our community and our workplace. But there's kind of a big five that I like to think about in terms of creating the conditions for happiness. So instead of chasing happiness for its own sake, we're creating the conditions. One is to think about how we matter, how our work matters. I think about that as purpose, but it's definitely purpose with a lowercase p. It doesn't have to be solving world peace or world hunger, right? It's that thing that we do that others are counting on. That's one. Another is when we really lean into creating connections and relationships. Even if we're introverts, those relationships are critical, and a lot of people find fulfillment in at least having that familiarity with people that they're working with. Another condition for happiness is learning and growth and stretch. How we can really look for challenges and kind of roll up our sleeves and, find that next opportunity that's interesting to us. A fourth condition is performance. We get a sense of esteem when we perform well. So, how can we really kind of do our best, bring our best, and dedicate and commit? And then finally, gratitude. I mentioned this. This is actually super correlated with happiness when we're intentional about waking up in the morning, what do I feel grateful for today? Or going to bed at night, what's one thing I'm grateful for? It actually does move the needle on happiness.
I love that I'm a big statistic guy, and I love when you can correlate it with things that you're learning about. And your presentation, we recently had you with one of our cityCURRENT partners, ImageWorks Commercial Interiors, and so it was so great to have you in town in Memphis to really share your expertise, and then as a group, we're bouncing some of our other pain points and asking questions with you and having that dialogue, and you just spitting out statistics and just like solutions. Like it was incredible. And I think it's so important because you spend so much time at your work, so enjoying it is one of the key factors for sure. And if you're privileged enough to work at a place where you enjoy it, that's just the beginning there in the well-being and just this future of work and the where we are now post pandemic and how the flexibility for some roles versus the non-flexibility in others is unique too. You have another book, Bring Work to Life by Bringing Life to Work, and it challenges traditional notions of this work-life balance. Can you elaborate on this concept?
Yeah, for sure. I One of the things that I really think is interesting is the idea of linguistic determinism. And that's the idea that the language we use shapes our thinking and it shapes our solutions and our approaches and responses. And so this idea of work-life balance is actually less helpful because it suggests there's a precarious nature between work and life. It suggests there's a trade-off. It suggests that one isn't part of the other. But in reality, work is part of a full life. And when people have higher levels of well being, esteem, and a sense of purpose in their work, they actually fare much better. There was a study that was just done by AARP. And it looked at people over 40. So, all right, they're maybe a little bit more senior in their career. But one of the things they found is that when people kept working, it made a huge difference in their mental health and their kind of enjoyment of life and their quality of life. There was a different study on younger people in college, and they found something similar that when we are able to make that contribution, that makes a huge difference. So, work life balance kind of isn't enough. We don't just want this precarious balance. We want to understand that work is part of a full life. We all have an instinct to matter. And so, when we're doing something, when we have to get off of the couch or get out of bed in the morning, that makes a really big difference. And all work has dignity. We don't need to be like running companies or starting new charities. If we're doing that, that's great. That's amazing. But just work as part of the way that we express our talents, part of how we're contributing to a community, how we're part of the fabric of a community, those are actually really, really helpful. So I like the idea of work life harmony or work life integration or work life navigation. There will be ups and downs. There will be moments where we're hanging on by our fingernails because it's crazy and there's so many things going on in our lives. And there will be moments that aren't quite as crazy, but we can always think about work as part of a full life and say to ourselves, oh, I got a lot to navigate today, or wow, I got to find the harmony in this one, right? But that thinking, the way that we frame it, I think makes a really big difference in how we get through it.
Yes, I think that is such an important part of how our well-being and mental health plays into our work-life harmony too, and the way that we position even some of the toughest days at work help us for when we go home and spend time with our children and family as well. So these books are such great guides for organizations. Tell me how that businesses can implement the principles from your books to really enhance employee engagement and satisfaction.
Yeah, I love that question because I think it's individual, right? We all have responsibility for our own best selves and our own well-being and all that kind of thing. But leaders and organizations also have a role to play. I think about that as both agency and structure. Agency, we each have a responsibility. Structure, the community and the workplace and leaders and organizations have a responsibility as well. So one of the things that organizations can do is really, really emphasize vision, mission, direction, kind of really be clear about where we're going as an organization. But then not just that, also be clear about what's my role, what's your role, what's the individual role in relationship to that. So I think that's one, is just that real clarity on vision, mission, direction. Another thing that organizations can do is be really, really intentional about learning opportunities for people. We all may not want to grow in the same direction. I might want to grow diagonally through the organization or horizontally through the organization. You may want to grow vertically through the organization, kind of in a more traditional sense. But when we're learning and working on new projects and doing new things, that's actually really helpful. Not to the exclusion of other things. We want to, the right kind of mix there. But when organizations are really planful about learning and growth, that makes a huge difference. Another thing organizations can do is be really intentional about how they help employees connect with each other. Affinity groups, employee resource groups, opportunities to chat at the beginning of a meeting and kind of get to know each other before we get down to task. Um, Having people connect on tasks with mutual goals, having people have the opportunity to contribute outside of their swim lane so they can get to know others in other departments. Those are all really good for connecting people very pragmatically. And the other thing, the last thing I'll say just at the moment is leadership development is huge. Leaders still are really, really important in creating culture, in reinforcing behavior, in modeling behavior. Whether we're conscious of it or not, we over-index on leaders. We kind of, watch and learn, and we see leaders around us, and we model our own behavior, even if we're not thinking about doing that. So when we're developing leaders, creating safe spaces for leaders, helping leaders to be empathetic and rigorous in the way that they manage, those are really, really impactful as well.
Well, I think it's really cool to look at it in the lens of like the love languages as well, but in the way that all of the employees receive praise differently. And, getting out of college and your first sort of quote unquote career, you learn a lot. And I think I expected to just be perfect right away because I'm like, I know everything. I'm a millennial in my early 20s. And then you get through and you're like, whoa, they just really yelled at me in that office. Like, okay, and you take it personally, and then there's so much learning in that first, like, real job, and what I found was that when you look at it the lens of that people receive praise differently, they want, like you said, they want to grow in their career differently. Some people don't wanna make it to the top. They're really great in their sweet spot, and they're happy to be there, and that's great for them. And so, recently we had Global Volunteer Month, and you have this great article in Forbes on the top 5 reasons to volunteer. And I think even corporately, part of our ethos at cityCURRENT is philanthropy, and so giving back, as part of our work and do good to others. And so it's also really cool to see how those affinity groups and those like-minded groups can go out and then serve the community. So if you're behind your desk all day, or for the most part, and then you realize that your coworkers are all passionate about animals or something that is really unique to you as well, and you go out and volunteer, and then you just have this like new lens and respect for each other. So
Yes, oh my gosh, I love that so much. There's um there's actually sort of a misnomer that we develop teams most effectively through social activities. Social are good, right? Do the escape room, do the, I don't know, the cooking class together, right? Social is good. Keep doing those. And when we do good work together, when we roll up sleeves with those mutual goals, that's huge. And volunteering is like a sweet spot, right? We get away from the office. We do something that's important to all of us. We get to learn more about each other because, oh my gosh, we're building a habitat home. And I figure out that I don't know how to swing a hammer. And you figure out that maybe, like laying sod isn't your strength, whatever, right? We're all sort of equalized through the process, but we get to know each other. We feel like we're making a contribution together. We're rolling up sleeves together. And so it's a really nice sweet spot. And you all at cityCURRENT, you're so focused on kind of focusing on good and positive activities. And those are brilliant ways to make a social impact for organizations.
and I think too, when just from a a friend group perspective, I think sharing others when you go to happy hour with friends, or even when you come home and talk to your significant other about work, you mainly will talk about maybe the downsides of it or whatnot. But I think it's really cool to then talk about, okay, well, what is your work doing when it comes to employee engagement, or have y'all, bouncing ideas off of each other, is so great too, because you learn that, like, oh, okay, even this quote unquote boring industry that your friend may be in is doing some really cool things to keep the engagement high and to keep people passionate about the work that they're doing. One other thing before we switch gears about the future of work that I found, and I want your advice on this, has been super helpful personally, is my friend made me take the predictive index. And so I learned quickly that I'm a promoter, but I also learned a lot about some of my strengths, but also who I work with traditionally, and how I can best work with them in a way that we're both thriving and not feel like there's some contention there. So, what are your thoughts about those programs? There's many of them, but what do you think about them and how they help bring in a team?
Yeah, I think they're so great. All of those sort of assessment programs. And there are so many that are really, really good. And they're good for a couple of reasons. One, they're really good for self awareness. I mean, even if you've done 16 of them and you do your 17th, right? You get a new lens, or you get a renewed lens. Maybe you're doing one you've done before. So think self awareness is huge. And we can understand, where am I already good and confident and strong, and where can I get even better? That's one. I think the other thing is that we learn more about the people around us as well, and where we can rely on them. And we share an experience. Like, shared experiences are a really important part of bonding. Statistically, we tend to choose people who are more similar to us, homophily. And that's the birds of a feather idea, right? And also, interestingly, profession tends to be a proxy for personality. This is not rocket science, but it is statistically sound that, based on your personality characteristics, based on your strengths, you tend to choose certain professions. So we tend to make friends within our professional groups because we tend to share more in common. And that's great. We should lean into that and enjoy and appreciate that. But statistically as well, there's some new research that if about 50% of your network are people who are different than you, that is the sweet spot for happiness. So we need those people who kind of think like us and talk like us, and we have shorthand, and we can, have shortcuts to understanding. But then about 50% of the network, if people are different from us, that's super helpful. We can learn and grow and hear different perspectives and have somebody challenge our perspective and help us think about our thinking, or suggest different activities or experiences that we might not have thought of ourselves. Those are helpful. So any of those tools and resources that help us get to know ourselves and then get to know others are really, really good for mixing up and understanding who we can rely on and who we can contribute to as well.
Yes, great advice there. And I think for so many of us that are like mid-career, or we're past sort of the first 5 to 10 years, we sort of hit a plateau, or maybe I'm just talking personally, and you start to introspect and think, my life challenges have changed. I may have gotten married, added a few kids, there's more stress at home. Maybe I should take a look and see what my strengths are now. Maybe what have I changed? What have I evolved? How have I evolved? And so those are so helpful. Even if your work isn't telling you, hey, you're going to take this assessment, I think spending the time and resources to do so just once again help you check yourself per se as well, and say, oh, okay, let me mind shift a little bit and think about it differently.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm also a big interior design snob, and I love the work that you all are doing at Steelcase. And so, City Current partner ImageWorks Commercial Interiors are a huge partner of y'all's as well. And so, tell us a little bit about what you're seeing post pandemic, the trends in the workplace. physically, and maybe some of the ways that Steelcase is working to enhance that space?
Yeah, I love this question too, because I think it brings us to kind of the reality, right? There's all the things going on in the world, like talent shortage and well-being and, the need for upskilling and all the new tech, right? Like there's all those forces kind of at play. And then the workplace ends up being a really important place for continuity and stability and innovation and kind of a touchstone, a center of gravity, if you will. And so we so appreciate ImageWorks and our partnership, and with you all as well. We've been focusing a ton on community-based design. And so we're thinking about how people come together in community. And we know that community is extraordinarily stimulating, motivating. It brings people together. Some organizations are still, embracing hybrid work, right? Some organizations are in full time, some aren't. There will be shifts and changes that continue over time in terms of how organizations make those choices. But we've looked at, different ways to think about the work environment. How might you have a city center where people kind of come together? I'm talking now, connotatively, not literally, right? Like, how might we think about an analogy of a city center where it's our place that we gather and we see each other across the work cafe and we're reminded about, we all showed up together to do this great work. How might we have a university district where we have classrooms and places to learn and places to connect? In what ways might we have an urban park where we have elements of nature, biophilia, places to rejuvenate? In what ways might we incorporate neighborhoods where we kind of come and see each other and work together regularly throughout the day? How might we know to recognize our coworkers and come to that spot? Even if we don't have a dedicated workstation, we still have kind of a dedicated neighborhood where we come. And where might we have business districts where we get together in meetings or to, really kind of roll up sleeves and do projects together in project rooms? So we're thinking about how do we construct the kind of experiences that we want people to have within the physical space. And here's one thing I'll just close with on this answer to this particular question, Andrew. There's really, really cool research just recently on actual cities. And huge numbers of people today report they don't have friends. For example, 27% of young men say, I do not have a friend. Something like 69% of people say they don't feel like they've got the connections that they wish that they had. People are increasingly wanting more friends. So, in this research on cities, they found that gathering places made all the difference. So, when there were literally park benches, yoga studios, coffee shops, parks, restaurants, places for people to physically gather, that actually made a huge difference. People were way more likely to report that they had friends and way less likely to report they didn't have enough friends. So there's something about gathering, there's something about being together in the physical place, and the workplace is a primary place that we do that.
It is, and we were built for community. So I love looking at from that aspect. And loneliness is an epidemic, and so it's hard to hear some of those statistics. But then when you look at the people around you, or even yourself, you go, okay, yeah, I can see where that's an issue. And you do feel from the creative field, I feel most creative when I'm in those community type spaces where I can bounce ideas off of each other, or you can look and see a beautiful garden, or you're getting your hands dirty and you're exercising or sipping that great latte, just learning about the next trend or future of work. And so you are still creating a legacy in the work that you are doing, but what has been the most rewarding aspect of your work in this field?
I love to look at groups of people and how we interact together. I always say, my work is in the sociology of work, how we affect our work and how it affects us. And I just love it when I see people who say, "Oh, I was really inspired by this new thinking," or I really, I thought differently based on this new piece of research that I heard." And I love when people are excited about going forward because they've thought about some new things. They've been inspired by some new things. And sometimes that happens in groups. And, every now and then I get a really, really amazing email like, oh, you wrote this article and I have to tell you, it really affected me. Or, I heard you say something about, community and it really, really changed the way that I am, going to be spending my time in the next couple of weeks or so. Those things have really made a difference to me. So I think that when we can have a positive influence on each other, that's huge. And I think it's not just toxic positivity, like, oh, Pollyanna, everything's, all is well all the time. We have ebbs and flows, and we do need to support each other through hard times. So I think it's that balance of providing new ideas and inspiration as well as support and validation because we're all going through it at one level or another.
That's a great answer. I love that. I was recently on a flight and ended up sitting next to a child who it was his first flight, and his parents, the way the airline I was flying did not sit them together, and they didn't choose that. So I was like, I'll take the reins. I have three. I'll take the reins with this one, and just seeing his first flight through his eyes was like, okay, I think there is definitely value in making sure not only are you part of a community, but you're part of a community that doesn't always look like you, even in age, and so learning, and I needed that because I was taking advantage of just like once again, just one more flight. I'll just get through this. Kind of just the oh, I hate flying, blah blah. But the wonder in his eyes of the flight, and I was thinking, there's a lesson here that I needed to know, and that take a break, but also learn from people in a different experience and way of life. And so this isn't, related to work necessarily, but I think when you bring people together, looking at even when you are part of a community, make sure that you're part of a broader, diverse community where you can learn from other people.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. I love that. Can I say one more thing about that, Andrew? That is the best story. It's totally like it takes a village, right? And we're all it's part of all of us. And so we all want to take ownership. In the work life literature, we often think, and it's statistically true, when you're happier at work, you'll tend to be happier outside of work. Got it. We all understand that. We've heard that before. But the opposite is also true. When you're happier outside of work, you tend to perceive greater happiness inside of work. So I always like to think about it as the whole picture, right? Like if we want more happiness at work, we can also do things outside of work, volunteering or working with our community or being a coach or a guide to a kid who's on his very first flight, right? When we do things that are rewarding, when we do things that feel like the right thing in terms of our obligation to the community, that absolutely builds us and it builds all kinds of our communities, whether it was the, community outside of work on the flight or the community inside of work in terms of what you deliver next time you're in person. So that's a cool story. I love that.
Thank you, and thank you for making it much more eloquently said. And
No, no, no.
got it. That's great.
You said it eloquently.
That's amazing. Okay, so for those that aren't having the best time at work right now, how can individuals advocate for positive change within their organizations?
Oh my gosh, I think it's the $6 million question. It's back to the idea that we all have ownership. And so I think we can point out where we see things aren't perfect. I think we can ask questions to kind of unearth or demonstrate what we see going on. I think we can create coalitions with others. I think we can be attentive to others and seek to support others. Because sometimes we're going through a really hard time at work, but often that is symptomatic of others going through a hard time as well. So for us to also be thinking about supporting others, that's huge. When we can advocate not only for ourselves, but also for others. And to the extent that we can think about systems and to the extent that we can think about patterns, I think that's a big deal. So, for example, I might think, oh, I'm not getting enough recognition. I need to advocate for myself to get more recognition. And that's great. And we can maybe advocate for additional systems for recognition and additional programs for recognition or additional ideas for recognition or additional teammates that we think should get some recognition. And so we advocate for them. So I think we're thinking about ourselves appropriately and we're empowered to do that. And we're kind of expanding that lens just a little bit. So we think about organizationally and systemically, what are some of the changes that we think can be made?
I love the idea of knowing and just even recognizing that you may having some pain points for you. You may not realize that some of your other coworkers are having similar pain points, and having that coalition or the dialogue instead of just keeping it as a monologue for you will help build change, positive change in your workplace. So as we wrap up, where can people go to learn more about your insights, work with you on a professional basis as well, bring you in as a speaker, and then where they can learn more about the great products at Steelcase?
Yeah, absolutely. Look to us online, of course. ImageWorks is online, a wonderful website, and Steelcase as well, steelcase.com. You can look me up at tracybrower.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Tracy Brower, PhD. I'm also on Instagram and X, kind of all the usual social channels, Goodreads, Unsplash, which is photography. I'm super amateur, so don't go looking for anything exciting. But yeah, people can reach out. I speak all the time and really, really happy to do that. So just reach out. You can reach out on my website, which has my Gmail, or on my LinkedIn, which again is Tracy Brower, PhD. So, and we would love for you to reach out to ImageWorks locally, reach out to steelcase.com. There's lots of information about this community-based design idea I was talking about, and lots of articles that I've written on Forbes and Fast Company. Those are listed on my website, or you can follow me on Forbes as well.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Brower, thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights on creating fulfilling work experiences and the future of workplace culture. Until next time, stay inspired and continue to make a positive impact in your work and community. Thanks for powering the good both locally and globally. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.